to undo the damage that's happened to us, then we're simply going to have another totalitarian, nasty system where people treat each other like crap. It all starts in here, and I think Derrick embodies that, and he's a wonderful communicator of those ideas. He's here in Austin to communicate them with you. Derrick Broze, ladies and gentlemen, at @DBroze, live free on Twitter. Thanks, brother.
All right. John always likes to remind everybody that I'm on Twitter.
Let's call him that instead of Derrick or Broze.
I think that's my new name. So, lots to talk about. I guess I know most of you are here either because you know John locally or because you want to see Adam talk about freedom. His amazing work in that book. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me for those who don't know. I'm from Houston, Texas. I've been working with John and Adam off and on for probably 3 or 4 years now. I started getting active in Houston at the end of 2009, early 2010. And started a group called the Houston Freethinkers, and similar to John's story, we were trying to do things through the political channels. We had some successes with kicking the TSA out of the city on buses and doing things like that, and rescinding the tyranny a little bit, but ultimately you come to the point where you realize the best solution is to work to compete with the state and to try to create counter-economic activity, counter-institutions, just to do the job better. People think that anarchy is saying that you don't want any government. Well, really, we're just saying we want to have self-government and that we can do a better job than the government can itself, and that starts on the individual level. So that's kind of the path I was on and have been on, and also more recently getting into journalism. I write for the Anti-Media and BenSwan.com and Mint Press News and a few other sites, as well as run the Conscious Resistance Network. And that term, that idea, the conscious resistance, it actually came about the summer before I went and interned with Adam and really started to learn more about the ideas of liberty and voluntarism. And basically, that summer I had one of those nights, and I'm sure you've had them, you go through your process of awakening where you just research and research and research, and sometimes you can't sleep, you just get so sucked into these various ideas and rabbit holes. And it'd been a while since I'd done that, and for whatever reason, that summer, June 2012, I spent like 3 or 4 nights not sleeping, not eating, just like researching, trying to, I kept feeling like I was getting close to some type of answer that would help for me and other people. And eventually the idea, this thought of the conscious resistance and what that embodies, what that means to me, came about. And essentially, I define that as the point in time when you decide that you're, I don't even like using the word struggle, but your claiming of your freedom and your path, when you recognize that it goes deeper than just fighting the physical manifestations of tyranny that we see in the world every day. Whether that be, literally looking at the government and the people, that these puppets they put in place, and when you realize, these people are just abstractions on the bigger issues. As John was saying, I tend to say that, we can spread these ideas of liberty and anarchy and move towards a more prosperous society, but if we don't all go through the peaceful parenting and the healing, then the revolution, I believe, is going to be a disaster, because eventually we'll have a bunch of know-it-all anarchists running around full of ego and not done any of that personal work, and that'll probably be a lot more of a disgusting situation than we want to deal with. So, essentially that's the thesis of this. And until we're willing to do that, again, anarchy and this decision to be a free person, even if you don't use the word anarchist, if you don't consider yourself to be an anarchist, the decision to be a free human being in general comes from within. We understand, I think most people here would understand the failures and the fallacies of collectivism and how important it is for the individual to claim their own freedom, and then for us to come together collectively, voluntarily, to make change. So in that same sense, you have to decide. I can't sit here and talk to you and tell you about these ideas and how great it is to meditate and to spend time in self-reflection and going through some of these painful experiences, but getting to know myself better. Because I essentially believe that if you don't know what your doubts, your fears, your insecurities are, your aspirations, your limitations, your hopes, if you truly don't know those things, then how can you know what it means to be free? And if you don't know what it means to be free, then how will you know if you ever get there? And so to me, this is the other side of the coin. And so I wrote a book about it with John Vibes. It's called The Conscious Resistance, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality. And that's essentially what I'm going to kind of cover tonight. I don't have any more copies tonight, but I will be passing around this thing here. I'm doing an event in Houston on the 26th, and then after that, all the books that I have after that event will be brought back here to the bookstore. If anybody is interested in writing their name or contact info when I'm done, then I can make sure that you get a book. And also you can download it for free if you go to consciousresistance.com/book. The whole book PDF form is available there. And I ask that if you enjoy it, please share it. What I've found is apparently me and John Vibes, who's my writing partner, are some of the only people to put these ideas together in writing. If you do a search of anarchy and spirituality, there are a few talks here and there from some people, but there's no text, there's no literature on these ideas. And I think because some of it has probably been hidden, because when people think of spirituality, they tend to think of religion, and when you think of religion, you think of the state, you think of control, and that doesn't sound very free at all. So we try to pull the wool back from those ideas and show that actually many of the world's major religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Tao, even some early Islamic teachings are actually rooted in anti-authoritarianism. But it was only later, whenever the political institutions came along and made them these organized religions, that they changed and co-opted the message of these teachers to make it where it was more about bowing down to a teacher, or you can only get to that God through our books or through our classes or through our book. They basically created the priestly class. And Michael Harner, he's an anthropologist. He studied shamanism and studied indigenous cultures and just history in general, and really did some great work in pointing out that before the state institution came along, the religious institutions already maintained control. They did that through fear of God or going to hell or these different punishments. Before they were able to do that, though, people expressed themselves and looked towards the sky and looked to philosophy to try to come to their own terms of what reality was, what God was, what the universe was, what existence was, and all these various things. So you had shamans come about. And shamanism is kind of a controversial term. I think it's a very limited term. Some people would even say it's a racist term, but it's basically a term that was made up by Western anthropologists to define traditions all around the world that really have very little in common. Basically, any culture around the world that was practicing something that they couldn't put a name on or label on could be generally termed shamanism. But there are some common traits which would include a trance-like state. Generally, there's a difference between a shaman. It's not a witch doctor. It's nothing like that. He's a community, or he or she is a community leader. They sometimes, depending on the culture, use plant medicine to ingest and to go on deep, powerful experiences to connect to God, to connect to the spirits. Sometimes they do it through drumming, through music. Sometimes through meditation. So we see these various strains. And what Michael Harner noted is that before the religious institutions came along, you had people in total anarchy choosing how to interpret the world, choosing which path to God made sense to them, coming up with their own interpretation of the world, coming up with their own interpretation of the universe and the great mysteries that we all ponder throughout our life. And then after a period of time, those institutions came along and we hear about the witches burning, right? Anybody who spoke anything outside of the dogma that was being preached in that particular area of the world was eliminated. You had all types of cultures, indigenous people, and teachings just wiped out because they didn't go hand in hand with what the state was trying to teach, or what the religious institutions were trying to teach. And eventually, religion, politics have become one, and those are, I think most people would say, you've got banking institutions, you've got government, the state, and you've got religion. Those are the three areas that kind of control and manipulate people's lives. So, what we're trying to do is say that you can still be interested in spirituality. You can still be interested in these great mysteries and wonders of the world. In fact, we believe that there's a benefit to it, and still be a free-thinking, self-governing, critical thinking person. You don't have to. I would even argue. I know there's some people who say they are Christians and they are anarchists. They are Christians and they are libertarians, but they have a more probably less. They have a view that's less based on what the church says, what the official leaders say, and more of their own interpretation. And as we point out in the book, when we look at Christ's actual actions, whether historical or just metaphorical, look at the actions in those stories. Tossing out bankers seemed to be his only violent act. The only time he's ever expressed any anger is when he's telling the bankers to get the fuck out. So, and he was also very much about pursuing your own knowledge, finding God within yourself. You can look up the Gnostic Gospels and the books that didn't make it into the official canon of the Bible, and see that there are some things that don't go hand in hand with the message that the Roman Catholic Church was trying to promote, which was basically like, you have to bow down, say these words, say this ritual, say this thing, attend these meetings, attend these churches, and then you will have access to the heavens, rather than you can create heaven right here on earth, which is the same thing Anarchy is saying. We don't need the government to do that, and we're saying we don't need the religious institutions to ponder these big questions. There's a phrase that I came up with a while back, and John and I did a bunch of podcasts together and basically developed the material that ended up in this book. And for me, anarchy is to statism as spirituality is to religion. See that? So anarchy is freedom in the physical sense, freedom when it comes to the state, and the state is obviously trying to control us in that physical sense, and spirituality, pursuing knowledge in your own, again, individual path that's going to look different for everybody, is freedom in that sense, while the religious institutions are trying to control us in that esoteric, more spiritual sense. Now, some of the things that we do in this book, I might do this now briefly, but we define terms because it's easy to have a conversation if you actually know what you're talking about, so you can agree on those terms. So within the book, we define freedom. I think you guys all understand that, but generally we use the definition of freedom, the absence of coercion. We also define consciousness because we talked about that and some other topics in the book, and that itself is a tricky word to define. And spirituality, when I say spirituality, I simply mean a practice that brings you closer to your essence, to your true being, to who you are, something that you're doing, whether that means walking, sitting down, meditating, writing. I mean, it can be anything. I think people kind of get tied up into what this practice looks like. We think we're taught that spirituality is dogmatic, that there's a rigid set of rules. But really, something can be a spiritual experience to you. You know, it doesn't have to involve praying on your knees, bowing down, giving over your life. If that fits for your teaching, then that's great. But I think that's what scares, and what I've found, especially in writing the book, and talk to a lot of anarchists who tend to be atheists, they immediately are turned away by this book. And I really try to challenge those, and anybody in the audience listening who is a strict atheist, to look into this book, because we're not pushing any type of dogma, but rather trying to expand our minds into some new areas that I think are important for the inquisitive, anarcho-libertarian, voluntarist-minded people to pursue in their path to freedom. We also define agorism. Agorism is a philosophy that I wholeheartedly believe in, that Adam and John both push as well, by this guy Samuel Konkin, who wrote the book New Libertarian Manifesto. It was his ideas and others before him, but he really put them together specifically on how to build counter-economic institutions, counter-institutions, whether that means counter the mainstream media with entrepreneurial media, independent media, small bookstores like this, community gardens. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can do business and remove money from that status economy and inject it into a newer economy that we all hope, as we build these ideas and implement the ideas of freedom cells that John was talking about, it'll be easier. So that's, in the strategic sense, that's my goal, is to use agorism as the strategy towards a more free world, and at the same time promoting these ideas of self-reflection and awareness. When it comes to agorism and the New Libertarian Manifesto, Samuel Konkin discussed the 3 A's of agorism, because he said agorism is anarchy in action. So the ideas of agorism aren't, I mean, there's 2 books written about it, there's a couple of other, 2 books by Konkin, there's a couple of other small pieces, but the philosophy is relatively thin, it's small, because it's a philosophy of action. That's the whole point. You know, there's no need to really continue to theorize on it. The idea is put it into action. You know, it's when you decide you're tired of just being an anarchist behind the computer or a libertarian behind the computer and in theory and in the books, and you actually want to live it and put it into action. That's when agorism comes into play. So in agorism, you have the agora, which is the marketplace. You know, it comes from the Greek, the market. So you have market interaction, the freedom in that sense. Anarchy, self-governance, self-rule, we all understand that. And then action, taking the steps to bring these things to fruition through counter-economic activity. And I also propose that we add a 4th A to this, and that is awareness, mindfulness, in all of our consciousness, in all of our actions. You know, if we, again, going back to what I was saying, if we don't do this deeper work, then we're going to end up. We can still create anarchist communities and panarchist villages and all these utopian things that we believe will happen. But until we do that deeper work, we're going to end up, it may take 1 generation or 2 generations, but we're going to find some of these same issues arising. And I'm not saying we can create a perfect world and that we're all going to be blissed out all the time or anything like that, but we can definitely work on the issues, whether they come from parents or the state, institutions, or whatever's in your environment, different trauma. I'm totally open about my trauma and my need for healing. And I think that's why I find this to be really valuable, because the more I speak out about these ideas, I feel like other people feel more inclined and more open to talk about the things that they need to heal from, and we don't have to all walk around and act like everything's okay, because there's a lot of fucked up shit that happens in the world, and some of it happens to us, and we have to heal from that. I'm going to read you a paragraph here from the book I think that will help summarize some of these ideas. And then I want to talk to you about explorative agnosticism, which is a term we came up to define our position as far as the spiritual sense, and also healing. We have a chapter on conscious healing, which talks about some of my favorite topics, including ayahuasca, psilocybin, looking to plant medicine for healing. So this is from that chapter, Conscious Healing. By choosing to reflect on our doubts, fears, insecurities, hopes, and dreams, we can come to know ourselves more deeply and begin to understand the ways we are limiting ourselves. Thus, our knowledge and application of freedom is more full. How can we truly know what freedom means to us as people if we do not understand ourselves? The truth is, we cannot. We may educate ourselves in the failures of the state, and maybe even overthrow that state through competition and peaceful resistance, but we will find ourselves facing similar conditions within a couple hundred years or so if we continue to operate on the same level of consciousness. If we do not deal with the root causes of humanity's pains, then we are only applying band-aids to a gaping wound that desperately needs healing. Imagine a post-revolution world without a spiritual transformation. Educated group of anarchists running around battling each other's egos due to lack of empathy and unresolved internal conflict. The revolution without healing is a recipe for disaster. We need to evolve forward, not continue to go in circles. That's all I'm saying. So that's what you'll find in the book. I'm going to go ahead and pass this around while I continue talking. If you're interested in keeping in touch, finding out more about the book, or ordering yourself a copy, please write your information. And like I said, you can download it for free whenever you want. So one of the other things I try to do in some of the essays, because the first part of the book, first 10 chapters, are basically laying out all these different points from the importance of peaceful parenting. We have an essay called Today's Inner Child Will Save the Future. Tomorrow, basically talking about that inner child, the importance of staying connected to your inner child, healing those inner traumas, and also the power of imagination. Just being an anarchist, being even a libertarian or voluntarist in this world requires imagination, and a lot of people lack imagination. They've had that beaten out of them throughout their life. You know, they're told from birth they can achieve whatever they want, but then after a period of time, your parents and society says, okay, it's time to give up on your dreams and become a real adult now. You know, that's the message that we're telling people, is give up on your dreams and just join the rest of us because there's no hope for it. And so after a while, you stop believing. You stop looking at the world as just, you know, every day I wake up and I feel filled with wonder that there is so much opportunity for me to create. You know, what can I create that day? What can I, you know, who can I connect with? What ideas can I be a part of? And I see it as just this amazing, joyous opportunity. And I don't wake up like, holy shit, the New World Order is coming. Like, oh my God. I see all those realities. I acknowledge them. But I don't let them control me. And by being in control of my own state of mind, then I am free, regardless of what they're doing. And that's what we have to remember. So we're trying to bring together the ideas that will show that there is anarchist tendencies in spirituality. And specifically, my experience... in Chapter 8, I talk about my experience going to prison. I spent 18 months behind bars over a period of 4 years. First a year, then 5 months, then 4 more months. For drug possession. This was 10 years ago. 10 years sober. This year. And that experience, though, led me to where I am now. I discovered meditation while I was locked up. I spent so much time writing and trying to understand my decisions and what had got me to that point and the reason I was drowning myself in drugs and just trying to fill these various holes that I had and recognizing where those holes were. And so it's been a long journey from that point to then waking my mind up to this cloud, looking at the world, seeing the drug war, looking at all these issues, becoming an activist, before I realized everything I was experiencing then was shaping me for this message right now. And one of the things I experienced in that time is the power of solitude, the importance of solitude. There's been 2 times in my life that I've been given opportunities to experience deep states of solitude, and one of them was while I was locked up in that situation. And anybody who's been locked up for more than, well, even if you've been in there for a night, but if you've definitely been in there for more than a couple weeks or a couple months, you know that it can be a difficult thing to deal with. Adam knows how to spin it the right way, though. You've got to go inside your mind. You see people all around you that are just, I met plenty of good people that are still going in and out of that system, you know. They're not ready to get out of that cycle. But I decided I was. And I wasn't going to go any further than this. I'd already kind of seen, I got caught with crystal meth, so I was facing felony time. I knew I'd screwed myself over, you know. I was 20 years old, and I'm just like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I need to figure this shit out. So I chose to use that time to just write and write and write, understand my mind, get into my head. I had my grandmother and my mom send me books on meditation, Zen, and just different things. I was really using that as an opportunity to learn and to become a better person and to get through that. So fast forward to the second time I get sent back, because I didn't quite get it after a year for some reason. I started plotting on what I was. For one, I was determined. This is it. I'm done. Like I have to get this. I can't keep coming back to this place. Like this is not like some people. And I've met these people. Like they're 40, 50 years old. These dudes just accept it as a consequence of their life that they go out and party and live a crazy life. And occasionally they get caught and they spend 6 months to a year, 2 years of their life in prison. And they get out and they go do the same thing. And they're totally fine with that. They're just stuck in that mentality, you know. And they're in that. They're institutionalized. And so I was seeing that and seeing all these examples like this could be me, this could be me, you know, really, and also seeing people my age, or when I was younger, experiencing the flip side of this, seeing them getting written angry letters from their children and trying to use that to them like, your kids are going to be in here like I am if you don't start changing your ways. Like you have the power. The same thing with peaceful parenting. You have the power to shape those next generations. And so I started really contemplating, what can I do when I'm free? When I finally get through all this, I really started to jog every single day. Once I was able to go outside and get on the track, I just would use that every day as like a mental meditation. Like every mile was one day closer to home, and I just remember like, okay, I'm getting there. And just using that as a strengthening part of that experience. And I decided that when I got through with all this, when I finally got on probation and parole and everything that I would end up doing, that I would take a journey to really celebrate being free. And I had friends that train hopped and hitchhiked and things like that, so I thought about that for a while. And then I started getting into biking everywhere. I bike everywhere, and I've been doing that for 5 years or so now. And I decided I'm going to take a bike tour. I'm just going to travel around the country. I'm going to volunteer on farms through wolfing, and I'm going to just be out there, just celebrate being free, being done with this. And that's exactly what I did. On January 3rd, 2011, I left Houston, came through Austin. I spent 3 months on the road, traveling across Texas into New Mexico, just volunteering on farms, camping out, and having the best, most crazy, stressful time of my life. And it really changed me. And those two experiences really taught me the value of having time to reflect on, again, on who you are, what it is you're pursuing. I think we all generally understand that we want freedom. We want more freedom than we have now. We want to feel free. We don't want to feel restricted. We want to feel like we can do whatever we want. We don't want to harm anybody. But what does it mean in a deeper sense to be free and to want free? To want that freedom? I think that involves a lot of personal, individual work. I can't tell you what that's going to look like for you. Even if we can all say we're all anarchists, we're all volunteerists, we're all libertarians, we all generally believe these same ideas. Try to put us all in the same house, and we're still going to have a lot of different ways on how we live and what we think freedom really looks like. So it's important for us to spend that time. In the book, we make a comment to the effect that if you're spending all of your time alone, that might be an unhealthy thing, and maybe it's time to go out there and get involved and meet more people and get your ideas out there and network and really grow in those ways. And if at the opposite of that spectrum is that you're always surrounding yourself with people because you're afraid to be alone, which, let's be honest, a lot of us are afraid to be alone. How many of us have been in relationship, whether it's friendship or romantic, just simply because you're afraid of what's going to happen if you shut up for 5 minutes and listen to what your mind has to say. But I'll tell you what, if you meditate for 5 minutes every single day, you'd be amazed at the insights that will start coming to you. You'd be amazed at the things that you start remembering. And I really do remembering. We're putting ourselves back together. Putting ourselves back together and remembering what it's like to be free people, because it's been a long time since we've had access to that freedom other than in our minds. I'm going to move it along real quick now. I don't know how long I've been talking. Just a couple other ideas that I want to touch on briefly that we go into more in depth in the book. For me, my type of anarchy is Panarchy. Panarchy is basically the idea that we could all live under various governing bodies side by side. And through the internet, you don't even necessarily need to live in the same place. Essentially that I could be governed, I could live next to you, but be living under a separate government, a different government, maybe a self-governance. So Panarchy is kind of controversial because it essentially says that, hey, anarchists of all stripes, people who want freedom of all stripes, let's put down the bullshit, focus on the common ground, and go towards that. It's essentially saying that at this point what's most important is to outcompete and to build the next stage, not to argue about what all the social arrangements or economic arrangements are going to look like when we get there. Because, have you seen this? Certain people just spend all their time bickering over, like, which type of freedom, which type of anarchy, which particular strain of economic activity, or exactly what the private defense agencies are going to look like, whatever. We're not even there yet. So we need to, first one, propagate this message, which people like Adam do a great job of doing. Propagate the message, build the institutions that are going to help us get there, and decide that we have a common enemy. I don't even really like to use that phrase, but we have the opposite polarity of it. We have them doing what they're doing, and we're doing what we're supposed to do. They're supposed to be bringing tyranny or for whatever reason, and we're supposed to create freedom. So I also look to the anarchists of Europe who originally came up with the term anarchy without adjectives. It was started by some Spanish activists who started to see anarchists and over there they were more of the communists, like socialist, social anarchists. But they were having a divide between those who wanted individuality and those who wanted to focus on anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism. So they started to promote this idea, like, hey guys, let's just focus on, move all the anarcho-communism, socialism out of the way. Let's just focus on our common ground and get to that point. So fast forward to the 60s, and there's a guy named Karl Hess who was really active in the modern libertarian movement, and actually I have mad respect for him, and we quote him at length in this book, because he did great work trying to bridge the divide between anarchists on the left and anarchists on the right, and just people in general, left and right, and really getting past those terms. And there was, in the 60s, there was quite the potential, and I think there still exists potential now, to, you see like Occupy and the Tea Party and these different, fringe elements that could potentially come together and do a lot of great things if they could get their shit together and stop being divided by the media. So they focused on that. Karl Hess came up with the idea of anarchism without hyphens. That was his version of it. The same idea, just saying that, an anarchist can believe in whatever God they want. They can work at whatever job they want. They can, that doesn't define what you are as an anarchist. An anarchist is somebody that simply says, I want freedom for myself, and I'm going to take the responsibility to get that. And I'm going to allow everybody else to be the same responsibility. Now, there's other arguments about what economic arrangements and the roots and the history of anarchism. We cover all that in here and basically lay out our position that we think, that anarchism without adjectives is the best way to go. Like I said, I personally identify as an agorist, a market anarchist, if I'm forced to identify. But there's just a lot of common ground is my main point with that. We also look at collectivism versus individuality. I think I'm going to probably end with that one in just a second. But two other things we look at: animal rights, we look at animal consciousness, plant consciousness, and the idea of the earth consciousness, this earth being some type of living being itself or some type of living organism. And we look at various viewpoints on there. We establish our position, but one thing you got to remember, because there's a lot of material here that I think could probably be seen as controversial. Like I said, some people are like, wait, they mentioned God, I have to turn away now, I can't read this. But we're not trying to say that this view that we present here is like, this is, obviously we don't believe in a monopoly, one-size-fits-all thing. I'm just saying, if you're interested in these ideas, you might find some value in it, and what our real hope is that we can spark the conversation, because as I said, there's no material out there, like, which is, to me, is just amazing. And left anarchy or right anarchy or libertarian, voluntarists, there's really nothing that bridges these gaps and shows you the common thread between Buddhism, the Tao, Islam, Christianity, and a path for those of us in the modern time to pursue that could give us more freedom. So we look at those ideas of plant consciousness in the extreme, from people like the Earth Liberation Front that are willing to burn down buildings and put themselves up in trees to stop logging, and then the other side of people who couldn't give a shit where their food came from and what happened to it, what kind of poisons were injected. And as usual, we try to strike the balance. That hey, I'm a vegetarian, John's not. I'm not advocating eco-fascism or saying that if you're not a vegan, you're fascist. I'm just saying maybe a little bit more awareness and consciousness of what we're doing with our diet, because, hey, we're putting things in our body. It's pretty important. But I feel like, how many times do you eating while you're also texting and trying to watch something on Facebook or a movie? You're not really paying attention to what you're putting in your body. You're not conscious of that experience. So I think if we bring that back, start looking at our diet, looking at factory farming, all this stuff that essentially is held together by the state. That's the common thread. You start paying more attention to your health, spiritual, mental, physical, and you start looking at the institutions that are working against you. Those are the state and everything that's tied to them. We also look at balancing the feminine and the masculine, which is, for a lot of anarchists and people on the right, I think feminism is a controversial topic, or maybe an uncomfortable one, but I think we do a good job of striking the balance, basically saying we don't need to go one way, one extreme to the other. Some feminists seem to argue really and I would say this is an extreme. I don't want to generalize too much. There's an extreme position, just like with anything, that advocates more of female supremacy than any type of equality. And there are also those on the other end that have a counter-reactionary thing, that want to be real aggressive and towards women, and also want to act as if women haven't been suppressed throughout history. I think that's something we can all admit. So we're basically trying to say that, again, finding the balance between these perspectives, finding the balance between feminine and masculine within yourself, and being able to connect, and also not letting ourselves be divided. Gender, men versus women, all these things, just another way of us being divided and separated, and put into another category that's easily divided and easily conquered. So we look at that as well. And then we also look at collectivism versus individuality. I'm about to wrap it up. Sorry if I'm going long. I don't know if I'm right here. But So 2 last things here. The collectivism versus individuality chapter is really something that I'm proud of because if you look at the history of collectivist ideology, it's pretty easy to see where it goes wrong. And if you go back even further to some of the first, they didn't call themselves anarchists, but for all intents and purposes, he was an anarchist. Josiah Warren, 1600s, was one of the first people to be here in America. And if you really think about how much of Americans were frontier people, and it makes sense why they wouldn't want the government, this far-off thing, telling them what to do. They're out here like scraping by, making it on the frontier. Josiah Warren was one of those people, and he worked with this other guy, Robert Owen, and tons of other people, basically launching the first intentional communities around the United States. And he has several journals describing his experience. And he went to go work with the Owenites and their community, and in his journal, what he says is the reason he believed, maybe this wouldn't work in every situation, but I think it's very telling. What he says is that the reason that that community failed is because they put the needs of the collective above the individual, and eventually that just clashed with their natural inclinations, and it fell apart after a while. So what we try to strike the view here is that obviously the individual is important. The individual is the smallest minority that needs to be protected. Communism and some of the more extreme elements, Maoism, Leninism, these ideas that I've been studying recently, they really proclaim to care about the working class and the working man, but in the end they always suppress anybody that goes against that, and they totally forget that your collective doesn't exist without those individuals. So when you say this individual, it's okay for him to die because it's better for the collective, or they are willing to let people starve to death because it's going to be better for the collective, I mean, this is a really horrendous idea. But that doesn't mean that there's no value to seeing us as a collective human race. I mean, there's value in the individual side, there's value in the seeing us as a collective. I think it's just not having collective as politics. But one of the stories I put in there comes from a Buddhist parable about the jeweled net of Indra. And Indra was seen as this god representation of a few different things, but in this particular story, they talk about the jeweled net of Indra. And I think this is a great example of understanding the interconnectedness, the inner penetration between our realities and our worlds as individuals, but also as this larger, beautiful collective. So what they talk about in that is basically Indra had this net that was individual shining diamonds, and they were beautiful, all around, reflecting light in all directions, and they were connected through this little strand that connected other diamonds, and it went infinitely in all directions. So each diamond was beautiful on its own, but also reflecting each of these others, and together, they extended to make up what they said was essentially like that's what we are. We are Indra's net. Our reality is that. But I think that's a great anecdote for what we can look to each other as. We're all awesome, beautiful, free, independent human beings. Adam does a good job reminding people about that too. And as soon as we recognize that and decide, and I speak from experience, that I just didn't give a shit about myself back in the day for various reasons. But it was because I was dealing with things I didn't know how to properly deal with. So I was stuffing drugs in every orifice I could find and see if that would get me somewhere. And then I was, just wallowing in my depression and things like that. I had suicide attempts and all this sort of stuff that eventually led me to that prison experience. And through that, I realized that I have to care enough about myself to find, my own path. And then through that, find freedom. And then through that, find self-love, which to me used to be a really corny, cheesy idea because I couldn't possibly understand how I could love myself with all these things I had going on. But since I've gone down that path and learned to embrace that and really try to just become who I'm supposed to be, and use that as an example, I've seen it reflected in other people. I've seen other people inspired by my work, and people, who inspire me, and it spreads on and on and on. We see that radiate. So as soon as each of us decide in our own path, in our own world, I'm going to be the best, glowing light that I can be. I'm going to be an example of these things. You will see other people inspired by your actions. You will see those ripples go out. And we're going to see this change. We're going to see, I hope, the conscious resistance. And the last point I want to make relates to the healing. And in the healing, I discuss everything from meditation, which again, meditation can be a number of things. It's not just sitting in lotus position facing the wall. Look into it. There's all kinds of different ways that you can reach a meditative state of mind. Even if that means after your busy day of work and dealing with your kids or whatever, you spend 5 minutes in your favorite chair, turn every electronic device off, put them away from you, and just sit down and breathe. Count your breaths. Reflect on your whole day from the moment you woke up to that moment then. And you're going to remember certain things that you might have just glossed over in your busy day. And when that becomes a regular practice, it becomes much more easy to be in tune with yourself and your needs. And then from that point, it becomes easier whenever you deal with people who aren't as balanced to stop and to reflect. Now, I'm not just going to react. I'm going to think about this, I'm going to process it, and that becomes a regular experience. So meditation, also something I've gotten to recently, got an appointment on Tuesday. Flotation tanks, laying in these tanks are awesome, we talk more about there, but flotation tanks, basically this big bubble that you lay in naked that's suspended in water, salt water, to turn off all the lights and everything, so you can't see. After about 10 minutes, your body and the water become one. Like and when your mind and your body doesn't have to hold itself up anymore, and you can just completely relax, all sorts of amazing things happen. I mean, you get visions. It's at the least, it's a powerfully relaxing experience. And I've been doing it now for a couple of months. And that's something else you mentioned. As we also discuss the revival of psychedelic research, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, all these things that were suppressed in the 60s after the Cultural Revolutions, that actually have medical value, and were shown even in the 50s and the 40s to have medical value. They're now giving them to terminally ill cancer patients. They're looking to treat people with nicotine addiction. PTSD is a huge thing. How many soldiers we got coming back with PTSD? And instead of putting them on those pharmaceuticals that just push them towards suicide, we see things like cannabis, we see MDMA, and these other experiences that under controlled settings, the right settings, because you have to respect these substances. I think they're teachers. You have to respect them for what they can and do to you, because if anybody's ever had a mushroom or an LSD trip and you decided you wanted to push it, you saw how far back they push whenever you go too far. So you have to have respect for those experiences, and the world's rediscovering these. And there's so many amazing techniques available for healing that I think may be generally outside of the perspective of the average libertarian voluntarist. And we hope that you guys will start to open your minds and your hearts to these ideas and really see what healing can look like. Because as I said, the revolution without healing is going to be a disaster. So let's create a more free world by working on ourselves. Thank you guys.